do you respond to that particular critique? Again, a loving critique from an elder of the struggle that some others share, that I've even shared as well, to be frank, is a concern about, in part because of the co-optation and the appropriation, that a more clear ideological structuring might be of some value here. But how do you respond to those kinds of, again, loving criticisms?
I think that the criticism is helpful. I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Zoom. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. The Fowler is honored to present today's program as the premiere of our Gay Pride series this June. We're deeply honored to welcome Black Lives Matter co-founder and Reform LA Jails Chair, Patrisse Cullors, and Melina Abdullah, professor and former chair of Pan-African Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles, and founder of the LA chapter of Black Lives Matter.
Here in front of us, I say a prayer that I learned from my ancestors, and it's a prayer that they learned from their ancestors.
And I feel like a lot of the work that you've contributed to this movement occupies many different spaces, right? So there's the traditional organizing work that we do together, but I think that one of the things that you've done is really embed spirit and speak beyond the immediacy of beyond our tendency to mediate everything through our brains, right? And maybe I'm sharing too much, but we become very intimate with the spirits that we call on regularly, right? Like each of them seems to have a different presence and personality. You know, I laugh a lot with Waukesha, you know, and I didn't meet her in her body, right? Yeah. I met her through this work. So I just want you to kind of speak to that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, I was always someone who almost obsessed about our ancestors, Black ancestors in particular. I wasn't raised with honoring ancestors necessarily. I was raised Jehovah's Witness, a little bit opposite of that. And as I got older and started to feel like I was missing something, ancestral worship became really important. And as you know, the Fowler Museum is so important because it has a bunch of West African traditional pieces inside that. Important practice. Hashtags are, for us, are way more than a hashtag. It is literally almost resurrecting a spirit so they can work through us to get the work that we need to get done.
It almost seemed like my spiritual work in Black Lives Matter, even though I lived in the same body and didn't like pretend like we weren't doing, you know, I never abandoned who I was spiritually, but it took almost a year for me to realize that when we come out into the streets and we pray, you know, the first thing that we do when we hear of a murder is we come out, we pray, we pour a libation, and we build with the community where the person's life was stolen. And it took almost a year for me to realize that this movement is much more than a racial and social justice movement. At its core, it's a spiritual movement, because we're literally standing on spilled blood, right?
Yeah.
And you can't pretend like that's work that's just like some organizing work. That's, you know, that's some serious stuff, right? Was there a moment for you where you recognized that, and I know you always had this spiritual practice. I remember like when we first started, I remember us going to the ocean and doing these rituals and really feeding our spirit, but I don't remember it being so deeply embedded in all that we did in 2013 as opposed to where we came in 2014. Was there a moment for you where you realized, wait a minute, this is all one thing?
Yes, pre-BLM, I remember when I was and doing an organizing training for a year in 2005 to 2006. And one thing that I felt was incredibly vacant was the conversation around spirituality and our movements. And it confused me because I was like, how are we not talking about spirit and spirituality? And I actually co-wrote with a few of us around the spirituality question. And is there room in our movements for spirituality? So I was already very much interested in that conversation. I think when we developed BLM, it crystallized for me. And I think we all also knew that we needed more spiritual protection as we started to be more targeted by lots of things, by the right, by police, you know, by neo-Nazis. So I feel like it's, you know, my homegirl, Heba Farag, who works out of the USC, I don't know what the center called, but for religious center, I forget. But she wrote an article years ago about the spirituality inside of our movement. She just recently wrote another one that I'll make sure to send to folks. And it was just like, the title is basically like, spirituality is at the center of Black Lives Matter. And I think that's not just for us. I feel like so many leaders and so many organizers are deeply engaged in a pretty important spiritual practice. I don't think I could do this work without that. I don't think I could do it as long as I've done it and as consistently. It feels like if I didn't do that, it would be antithetical to this work.